when the sun was the clock. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine life in a world without clocks. No tick of pendulum, no bell of wristwatch, no glowing numbers in the dark. For most of the Middle Ages, time was not kept in precise seconds or minutes. Instead, it was measured by sun and shadow, by bells and prayers, by meals and chores. This was not the hurried time of modern life, but a slower, more uncertain rhythm, one that governed everything from work in the fields to the opening of market stalls. The sun and its shadows. In early medieval villages, the sun itself was the master of time. Dawn signaled waking, noon marked the height of labor, dusk brought rest. Shadows served as silent clocks. A farmer might note how long his own shadow stretched across the furrows to know whether it was time to eat. A craftsman in town would glance at how the sunlight slanted through a window or across a street. Sundials, though known since antiquity, were not common for ordinary people. They required placement, maintenance, and often a literacy of numbers. Instead, people relied on the simplest indicators: the crow of the rooster, the warmth of sunlight on a wall, the dimming of light through narrow windows. Time was felt, not counted. This looseness shaped daily life. An hour could mean any length of time, depending on the season. In winter, daylight hours were shorter, so medieval hours were compressed. In summer, hours stretched long, filled with light and labor. Thus, the very measurement of time shifted with the seasons, reminding people that time was not a rigid thing, but a living rhythm tied to the earth. Monastic bells. If the sun governed fields, the bell governed monasteries. Monks divided the day into the divine office, a series of prayers recited at fixed times. Matins before dawn, lauds at sunrise, prime at first light, terce mid-morning, sext at midday, none mid-afternoon, vespers at dusk, compline before bed. These hours created a structure that radiated outward. The ringing of monastery bells carried across valleys and towns, reminding not only monks but villagers of time passing. A bell at sext told a farmer it was midday. A bell at vespers told a craftsman to put down his tools. In this way, monastic time seeped into daily life, even for those outside cloister walls. The rhythm of prayer was strict, but not mechanical. Bells might ring later on stormy days, or earlier if the monk keeping watch overslept. Timekeeping depended on human attention and thus varied. Yet it gave a sense of order, a cycle repeated day after day, year after year. For medieval minds, time was not a line rushing forward, but a circle: sunrise, prayer, sunset, rest, and back again. Market rhythms. In towns, time was measured by markets and meals. Stalls opened after dawn, when buyers arrived with baskets and coin. Bakers began before first light, kneading loaves to be ready when townsfolk stirred. Blacksmiths lit their forges as roosters crowed, closing shop as daylight waned. No precise opening hour was posted, no sign declared open at 9. Instead, rhythm guided routine. A bell from the parish church might signal the beginning of market. The smell of bread in streets told others the day was underway. When shadows grew long and torches sputtered to life, shutters closed, and streets emptied. Inns, too, followed this rhythm. Meals were served not at fixed hours, but when hunger called. Guests ate together when stew was ready, not when a clock demanded. Time in such spaces was communal, tied to shared work and shared appetite. The sound of time. Where no clock ticked, sound carried the measure of hours. Bells, chants, roosters, even the striking of blacksmiths' hammers became auditory signals of time's passage. In some towns, watchmen blew horns at night to mark hours, ensuring both safety and rhythm. Night watches were divided into segments, often 3 or 4 rather than hours. A guard might say, "I serve until the second watch," meaning until a colleague relieved him. Travelers on the road judged their journeys by such divisions, resting at inns before first watch or riding after third. These sounds shaped memory. A child remembered the toll of evening bell as the signal to run home. A farmer recalled the crow of rooster as the start of toil. Without clocks, time was carried in ear and habit, not in numbers. A slow sense of change. In this world, change was measured not in minutes, but in seasons. Spring planting, summer harvest, autumn markets, winter rest. These cycles mattered more than any precise hour. People thought of time as task-based. One worked until a field was plowed, a loaf was baked, a roof repaired, not until a bell struck a number. This slow rhythm produced a different relationship to life itself. Urgency existed, but it was tied to weather, famine, or danger, not to the ticking of hands on a dial. To wait for a friend might mean hours of patience, not anxious checking of watches. To promise to meet at sext meant somewhere around midday, not exactly at noon. Precision was neither expected nor possible. Picture, then, a medieval village at dusk. Smoke drifts from chimneys, fields lie quiet. Children run home at the sound of church bell. The inn door creaks shut, the hearth glows within. No clock ticks, no minute hand moves. Time flows in cycles. Light to dark, prayer to rest, hunger to fullness. This was the world before precision, before schedules ruled every day. And yet, it raises a question. When did this rhythm begin to shift? At what point did medieval people move from sun and bell to water clocks, sandglasses, and eventually the mechanical tick of gears? Water, sand, and the first mechanical dreams. If the first measure of medieval time was the sun and the bell, the next step came with contraptions that sought to capture time in flowing water, falling sand, and slowly turning gears. These devices did not belong to every household, nor did every village see them. Yet where they appeared, monasteries, courts, ships, and universities, they revealed a growing desire to pin time down, to transform it from the rhythm of nature into something that could be measured, counted, and divided. The water clock's gentle flow. The water clock, or clepsydra, was no medieval invention. It had been used in Egypt, Greece, Rome, and the Islamic world centuries before. But in the Middle Ages, it continued to find life. especially in monasteries where the demand for precise hours of prayer pressed monks toward innovation. The principle was simple. Water dripped or flowed from one vessel into another, its steady pace serving as a measure of passing time. The amount collected marked the hour, though accuracy varied with temperature, vessel size, and the steadiness of flow. Monks would listen for the rise of water or watch its level, then ring bells to mark the time. In some accounts, elaborate clepsydras were constructed, decorated with figures that moved or bells that rang. Yet most were humble devices, jars with narrow holes, bowls floating on water that sank as time passed. Their trickle was soothing, like a heartbeat, a quiet reminder of time's flow, hidden in cloisters where prayers rose with the sound of dripping water. The hourglass at sea. If water served monks, sand served sailors. The hourglass, with two bulbs of glass joined by a narrow neck, offered a more portable way to measure intervals. Its sand flowed evenly regardless of motion, making it valuable aboard ships. Mariners used it to mark the length of a watch, the timing of shifts, and even the estimation of distance traveled. In an age when the sea was vast and uncertain, the hourglass provided reassurance. Its steady fall of grains offered a rhythm against the boundless waves. Sailors turned it again and again, each turn marking a slice of the endless journey. On land, hourglasses appeared in churches and universities, often beside pulpits or lecture desks. A preacher could keep track of the length of his sermon. A teacher could measure the span of a lesson. Still, they were rare and precious, their glass fragile, their making a skill not widely spread. To see one was to be reminded that time could, in fact, be contained. Mechanical beginnings. The great leap, however, came with the birth of mechanical clocks. By the late 13th and early 14th centuries, devices of gears and weights appeared in European towns. They did not tick with minute hands, nor whisper with pendulums. That would come later, but they turned wheels and moved hands across dials, powered by falling weights. The earliest mechanical clocks were built for churches and cathedrals. Their purpose was not private but public, to regulate bells for the divine office, to mark communal time with greater reliability than human memory or water's flow. These machines were massive, often filling entire towers, their gears of iron, their frames of timber. They required constant tending, weights wound, gears adjusted, bells struck, but they embodied a new idea. Time is something external, objective, and communal. The first references to such clocks appear in England, Italy, and France around the same decades, suggesting parallel invention or rapid spread. By the mid-14th century, towns proudly boasted their great clocks, set in towers, striking bells across rooftops. Citizens gathered not just to hear prayers called, but to marvel at the new mastery of time. The language of bells. With mechanical clocks came a more regular soundscape. Bells, once rung by hand at varying intervals, now tolled with mechanical rhythm. The town heard hours, marked with consistency never before possible. This did not immediately change daily life, for people still worked by task, not by number. But it introduced a subtle shift. No longer did one have to rely solely on shadow or guesswork. Bells gave a shared reference, and as towns grew busier, markets more crowded, and labor more divided, such reference became valuable. A merchant could promise to meet when the bell strikes sext, and no others would hear the same strike. In this way, the clock began to move from monastery to marketplace, from cloister to community. Awe and anxiety. Not all welcomed these machines without question. Some saw them as wonders of divine order, gears moving with heavenly precision, echoing the cosmos itself. Others worried they disrupted natural rhythms, replacing the sun and seasons with cold iron. Chroniclers marveled at their intricacy, but some preachers cautioned against obsession with minutes and hours, urging instead a focus on eternity. Still, the mechanical clock spread. Its very size and sound made it impossible to ignore. A town with a clock tower announced itself as modern, prosperous, connected to the wider current of innovation between nature and mechanism. For centuries, natural and mechanical time coexisted. Farmers still watched shadows, sailors still trusted hourglasses, monks still listened for dripping water. But alongside these, gears turned in towers, bells rang with iron regularity, and sand slipped through glass bulbs. This coexistence is what made medieval timekeeping unique. It was not a sudden revolution, but a layering, natural rhythms, sacred hours, flowing water, falling sand, and turning gears, all overlapping. People lived among these measures, choosing which to trust depending on place, task, and need. Picture a medieval town square in the 14th century. The sun hangs low, casting long shadows. A monk checks his water clock in the cloister. A sailor turns his hourglass on a ship rocking in harbor. In the tower above, iron gears grind, and a great bell tolls across the rooftops. Each sound, each movement, each grain of sand is a measure of the same thing, the passing of time. And yet, the question remains, how did this layering of measures, sun, water, sand, and gear, prepare the way for the stricter discipline of time that would come later when the minute hand appeared, and bells rang not only for prayer, but for labor, wages, and work itself? Bells, towers, and the ordering of communities. By the late Middle Ages, time was no longer only the rhythm of sun, bell, or dripping water. It had become public, cast into the air through the ringing of great bells from towers that loomed above marketplaces and town halls. Where once only monasteries kept strict watch of hours, now entire towns began to live beneath the sound of iron striking bronze. This section explores how the spread of mechanical clocks and their bells reshaped medieval communities, quietly, steadily, and almost without notice, until daily life itself was tuned to their rhythm. Towers as symbols. When a town raised a clock tower, it was more than a tool, it was a statement. Towers were costly, requiring masons to build, smiths to forge gears, founders to cast bells. To erect one was to declare prosperity, ambition, and a desire for order. Towns competed with one another, proud of their clocks as they were of their cathedrals. Standing in the square of a 14th century city, one might hear bells pealing not just for prayer, but for hours, for curfews, for market openings. They echoed against timbered houses, drifted across rivers, and carried to fields beyond the walls. A clock tower was not silent machinery. It was the heartbeat of a community, the sound of discipline. With bells came discipline. At first, they marked canonical hours, prime, sext, vespers, familiar from monastic tradition. But increasingly, they rang for worldly matters. A bell might signal when market stalls must open, when they must close, or when taxes were due. Curfew bells ordered shutters shut and taverns emptied. Bells announced council meetings, executions, or festivals. In this way, time became both sacred and civic. To ignore the bell was to risk fine or punishment. Thus, the sound was no longer just a guide. It was authority itself, woven into the air. Labor and the hour. The growing regularity of bells also shaped labor. Guilds of craftsmen began to measure work by hours rather than only by tasks. An apprentice might serve until the third bell, instead of until his master deemed the day complete. Payment, too, began to shift from daily or task-based wages toward hourly reckonings. This change was slow, uneven, and incomplete, but it marked the beginning of something new, a world where time became not only natural or sacred, but economic. Each bell strike began to echo not just in ears, but in ledgers. Curfew and control. One of the most common uses of bells was the nightly curfew. At a set hour, often around dusk, bells rang to remind townsfolk to quench their hearths, close their shutters, and stay indoors. Ostensibly for fire safety, curfew also reinforced order, keeping streets quiet, limiting tavern rowdiness, and ensuring that watchmen had authority at night. Imagine a town at curfew, bells tolling solemnly, shutters closing, smoke from hearths dwindling, dogs barking faintly in empty lanes. Time itself seemed to fold inward, guided by the striking of metal above. Bells in memory. People measured their lives by bells. A child recalled the sound that called him home at dusk. A merchant remembered the tolls that marked fairs and trading days. A widow listened for bells that told death, their slow peal echoing grief. Bells became woven into memory. They marked the cycles of harvest festivals, the somber days of fasting, the jubilant ringing at weddings. No written calendar was needed. The community carried time in its ears. The politics of time. Control of bells was power. Town councils, guilds, or lords decided when they rang, and for what purpose. A quarrel might erupt over who had authority to strike the hour, church or city. Some disputes became legendary. Bells seized, silenced, or recast as spoils of war. Thus, the clock tower was both practical and political. It was not just about keeping time, but about displaying control over it. The bell that rang above a town declared not only the hour, but whose voice commanded the rhythm of life. Awe in iron and bronze. For ordinary townsfolk, the clock tower was a marvel. Few understood its gears or escapements, but all heard its voice. To climb its ladders and see the iron teeth grinding, the weights descending, the hammers striking bronze, was to glimpse both mystery and mastery. Chroniclers described them with awe, comparing their steady rhythm to the cosmos, to God's creation itself. Even their imperfections impressed. Clocks drifted, their hours sometimes long or short, requiring adjustment. But this did not matter. What mattered was the sense that time was there, external and steady, no longer only in the shifting sun or the memory of monks. Between silence and noise. It is easy to imagine medieval towns as noisy places, markets bustling, carts rumbling, dogs barking. Yet silence was common too, especially at night or in winter. In such silences, the bell was stark, dominating. Its toll could echo across still air, commanding attention. For those living near towers, the sound was constant. Children fell asleep to it, bakers rose at it, watchmen timed patrols by it. For those further afield, it was faint, a distant reminder that order existed somewhere beyond the horizon. By the close of the 14th century, bells and towers had given Europe a new kind of time. Communal, mechanical, and authoritative. They structured markets, curfews, and labor, shaping both memory and discipline. Picture a town square at twilight. The sun fades, stalls close, dogs bark faintly. A bell tolls from the tower, deep and resonant, carrying across roofs and fields. Families quench their hearths, apprentices roll up tools, travelers quicken steps. Time itself has spoken, not from the sun, not from shadows, but from iron and bronze above. And so we must ask, how did this growing order of hours prepare the way for what came next? The invention of portable time, when not only towers, but individuals, began to carry time on their very wrists and tables? From communal hours to personal clocks. By the dawn of the 15th century, the slow march of medieval timekeeping had already reshaped how people lived. What began with sun and prayer bells had grown into a culture where entire towns moved to the rhythm of clock towers. Yet a new transformation was approaching. Time would soon leave the square and the cloister to enter households, workshops, and eventually even pockets. In this final section, we explore how personal and portable clocks emerged, and what this shift meant for medieval life and its legacy. Domestic time. The earliest mechanical clocks were public, immense machines in towers. But by the late Middle Ages, smaller household clocks began to appear among the wealthy. These were not wristwatches. Those would not exist for centuries, but heavy, ornate devices placed on tables or hung from walls. Constructed of iron, often encased in wood or brass, these domestic clocks were still inaccurate by modern standards. They had no minute hands, sometimes not even dials. Instead, they struck bells at intervals or displayed hours through rotating discs. Their main purpose was symbolic, to demonstrate wealth, sophistication, and access to the new science of mechanics. Imagine a merchant's hall in Flanders, tapestries on the walls, candles flickering, and on a sideboard a clock with slow-turning gears, striking the hour with a soft chime. Guests marveled at it, not only for its function, but for what it signaled, the host's connection to learning, trade, and modernity. Portable devices. From household clocks, the march continued toward portability. By the 15th century, spring-driven mechanisms allowed the creation of smaller timekeepers. Early portable clocks were heavy, box-like, and often worn around the neck or carried in pouches. They were rare, precious, and unreliable, yet they pointed toward a future where time would not be tied to towers, but carried with individuals. These devices, sometimes called clock watches, were marvels of craft. Goldsmiths and locksmiths collaborated to create them, combining artistry with precision. They ticked unevenly, sometimes losing hours in a day, but they fascinated owners who delighted in holding time in their hands. The symbolism was profound. No longer was time only communal, sounded by bells for all to hear. It became personal, private, something one could own. A wealthy traveler carrying such a clock had a tool of authority. He could claim when the hour had come, regardless of the sun or the town bell. The merchant's ledger. For merchants, these changes mattered deeply. Trade relied on timing. Markets opened at set hours, ships sailed with tides, contracts specified dates. With more precise timekeeping, merchants could organize schedules with greater regularity. Hourly reckoning of wages became more common. Ledgers recorded deals with sharper detail. This was not yet the time is money philosophy of later centuries, but its roots lay here. When a merchant noted that work lasted 2 hours rather than from dawn to dusk, a subtle transformation had begun. Time became measurable, divisible, and therefore negotiable. Time and the body. The regulation of hours also shaped how people thought of themselves. Monastic schedules had long structured prayer around specific hours, but now labor, markets, and contracts joined in. Time seeped into daily routines, dividing sleep, meals, and tasks. Medical theory, too, used hours. Physicians timed when to administer herbs or bleed patients, linking treatments to cycles of the day. Farmers, influenced by bells, began to pace tasks more evenly, rather than working until exhaustion. Time was no longer just a natural flow. It became a framework through which life itself was measured. Resistance and continuity. Not everyone welcomed the spread of clocks. For many rural villagers, sun and season remained sufficient. A farmer sowed when frost lifted, not when a bell tolled. A shepherd drove flocks by daylight, not by mechanical gear. Indeed, much of Europe lived in this duality. Towns embraced clock towers, while countryside clung to natural rhythms. This tension persisted for centuries. Even as household clocks spread, most people continued to rely on roosters, shadows, and bells. This continuity reminds us, medieval timekeeping was never a single system, but a tapestry of overlapping rhythms: natural, sacred, civic, and mechanical, each layered on the other, each chosen depending on context, memory, and meaning. For those who lived through it, the new order of time was not abstract. It was lived experience. The sound of bells at curfew, the chime of a household clock, the ticking of a portable device in a nobleman's hand. It shaped memory. A child remembered the first time a town bell tolled regularly. A craftsman recalled the day his guild began reckoning hours. A sailor thought of the hourglass turned endlessly at sea. Time was no longer only the cycle of sunrise and sunset. It had gained voices, bells, ticks, chimes, and these voices became the background of memory. Toward modernity, the medieval march of time set the stage for the modern world. By the 15th century, Europe was dotted with clock towers, household clocks adorned halls, and portable devices hinted at watches to come. This was not yet the world of timetables and factory whistles, but it was its foundation. From this point forward, time would only tighten its grip. Minutes would appear on dials, pendulums would bring accuracy, railroads and factories would impose schedules. The medieval innkeeper, the farmer, the monk, they would all, in time, be joined by generations for whom the clock was no longer a marvel, but a master. Picture, at last, a medieval town at dawn in the 15th century. The sun rises, as it always has. Bells toll from the cathedral, marking prime. In a wealthy merchant's hall, a household clock chimes. On the road, a nobleman carries a spring-driven clock, ticking softly in his pouch. 3 measures of time overlap: natural, communal, personal. Each speaks of the same passing hours, but each claims them differently. The sun warms the earth, the bell orders the town, the clock belongs to one man's hand. This was the legacy of medieval timekeeping, a slow layering, a march from nature to mechanism, from community to individual. And it leaves us with a question. In our own age, ruled by seconds and screens, do we still feel time as they once did, as something lived, breathed, and shared? Or has it become only a number glowing in the dark?